What if the only man in the courtroom who still believed in honor was the one everyone called a loser? Eli Ward stood before a jury that had already decided who mattered. The prosecutor's words still echoed. "He's a nobody, Your Honor." Laughter rippled like static. Eli's chest burned, not from shame, but from something deeper, defiance. Behind him, Jonas Hale sat shackled, eyes lowered. A man who had once faced gunfire, but now faced mockery. Eli's voice cracked the silence. "Every life has weight, even the ones you've forgotten." The judge sighed, indifferent. And then, as if the world itself paused to listen, the wail of sirens grew louder outside. Tires screeched. Secret Service agents swarmed. The courtroom windows trembled. Eli turned. A presidential motorcade was stopping right outside the courthouse. No one spoke. Even Marla Crane's smirk faltered. The president himself was stepping out, his face pale and purposeful. Eli whispered under his breath, "Maybe nobody's finally been heard." The air thickened with fear, confusion, and the promise of something greater than justice, truth. The courtroom erupted into restless murmurs, the walls themselves seeming to lean in. Eli stood still, watching uniformed men rush past the windows. The judge's gavel slammed down, calling for order that no one could hear. Marla's voice cracked with disbelief. "Is that the president?" Eli didn't answer. He watched Jonas, whose calm face now carried a flicker of dread. "He's not here for me," Jonas whispered, but his tone betrayed uncertainty. Outside, engines rumbled, radios buzzed, and somewhere a helicopter circled. For a moment, every soul in that room felt small, suspended between truth and fear. Eli's heart pounded with a strange knowing, the feeling that the trial had just become something far greater than guilt or innocence. It had become about power itself, about the forgotten man who was suddenly being remembered by the highest office in the land. The doors burst open. Secret Service agents swept in, crisp and mechanical, their voices echoing through the chamber. "Clear the area," one shouted. Cameras clicked. Reporters stumbled to their feet. Eli's instinct pulled him to step forward, but an agent's hand stopped him cold. The president entered with solemn grace, every eye following him as though witnessing a myth made flesh. He didn't look at the judge, or Marla, or even Eli. He walked straight toward Jonas Hale. The veteran tried to rise, but his chains rattled, anchoring him to the floor. The president's voice, low and raw, cut through the stunned silence. "I've been looking for you." Gasps rippled. The prosecutor froze, her confidence draining. Eli watched in disbelief, as history seemed to bend before his eyes. A man once mocked now, receiving a gaze of reverence from the most powerful man alive. Eli could feel the room tilting toward disbelief. The judge's voice quivered as he demanded, "Mr. President, this is a closed proceeding." But the president ignored him, kneeling beside Jonas, lowering his voice. "You saved my son's life," he said. A single sentence, but it shattered the courtroom's facade like glass. Jonas stared, speechless, his eyes wet with disbelief. Eli's breath caught. This wasn't just recognition, it was revelation. Marla's lips parted, ready to object, but no words came. The reporters were already racing for the exits, phones raised high. In that frozen moment, justice felt like something that had slipped through cracks for years, only to crawl back under the weight of truth. And Eli, standing between two worlds, the powerless and the powerful, finally saw the story he was born to defend. Chaos followed truth's arrival. Reporters flooded the corridors, guards shouted orders, and the courtroom became a storm of disbelief. Eli's mind raced. How could a man branded a criminal have saved the president's son? He looked at Jonas, who sat trembling, the weight of years pressing on his chest. "I didn't want this," Jonas murmured. "They made me disappear." Eli knelt beside him, whispering, "Not anymore. Outside, thunder rolled through the city as the president faced the crowd, his voice firm. This man deserves justice. The rain fell harder, as if the heavens themselves were washing the courthouse clean. Eli rose, realizing that for the first time in his life he wasn't just defending a client. He was standing inside the turning point of history. The forgotten man was no longer invisible, and Dunewood would never be the same. By nightfall, the courthouse had turned into a fortress of flashing lights and restless crowds. Eli sat on the courthouse steps, soaked in rain, watching chaos blur into silence. The president had left under heavy guard, leaving behind questions louder than thunder. Jonas was taken to a secure holding room, not as a criminal, but as a man of interest. Reporters shouted Eli's name, calling him the defender of the forgotten. He felt none of the pride they spoke of, only a storm inside him. Marla Crane exited through the back, her face tight with fury, whispering into her phone like a woman cornered. Somewhere deep down, Eli knew she was part of something darker, a truth too dangerous to stay buried. Above the courthouse, lightning split the night sky, and for the first time, justice didn't feel like a word in a book. It felt alive, unpredictable, and waiting. Inside a dimly lit interview room, Jonas Hale sat across from Eli, now free of shackles but still bound by memory. They buried everything. Jonas muttered, his voice raspy from years of silence. After the mission went wrong, they made sure no one knew I existed. Eli leaned in. And now the president remembers. Jonas shook his head. No, someone wants him to remember. And that's the danger. Eli studied his client, seeing in him not a criminal but a man carrying the weight of a nation's secrets. The rain tapped gently on the windows, like a quiet countdown. Somewhere beyond that room, power was shifting, and both men were standing in its path. At City Hall, Marla Crane stood before a wall of monitors displaying live coverage of the courthouse chaos. Her reflection shimmered across the glass like a ghost of ambition. He wasn't supposed to survive, she whispered. A voice on the other end of her phone replied coldly, "Then fix it." Her jaw tightened. She turned, facing the rain-streaked skyline. Somewhere beneath her anger was fear. Fear that Eli would uncover the trail she helped cover up years ago. The city's glow bathed her face in a sickly gold, and for the first time Marla wondered whether winning had cost her soul. That night, Eli drove through the deserted streets, thoughts spinning like wipers against the rain. Every turn of the road pulled him closer to something he didn't yet understand. He stopped by an old diner, the kind that still smelled of grease and yesterday's coffee. Inside, Detective Ron Vickers waited in a corner booth, cigarette smoke curling like ghosts. "You're in deep ward," Vickers said. Hale's story goes back decades, deeper than this city. Eli sat down, his reflection warped in the diner's neon light. "Then tell me where to start." The detective leaned in. "Start by asking who wanted him erased, and why the president couldn't stop it." Outside, a police siren wailed, fading into the storm. Morning crept over Dunewood like a secret trying to escape. The courthouse lawn was littered with news vans and tangled cables. Eli stood at the edge, staring at the crowd gathering around the steps where he'd stood the night before. Jonas Hale was being transferred under protective custody, agents moving him quickly to an armored van. The president's statement had gone public. A hero lost in the shadows deserves his name restored. Yet Eli sensed danger in the applause. Power never forgives exposure. As Jonas was driven away, he met Eli's gaze through the window, mouthing words that chilled him. "They'll come for both of us!" The van disappeared into traffic, and Eli's reflection stared back from the courthouse glass. A man who had stepped into a storm he could never walk back from. The next day, Dunewood pulsed with chaos. News anchors dissected every word, every glance, every unanswered question. Eli sat in his apartment, curtains drawn, watching the city tremble under its own curiosity. On the screen, the president spoke of truth and honor, but Eli heard something else. Fear. His phone buzzed. A number he didn't recognize. Mr. Ward. A calm voice said, "If you value your life, stop asking questions." The line went dead. Outside, a car engine idled too long. He rose slowly, heart pounding, and peeked through the blinds. A black sedan sat across the street, windows tinted. The world that had once ignored him now watched him like prey. Justice had awakened, and it was hungry. At the federal holding facility, Jonas Hale sat in silence, staring at a photo of a young soldier. The president's son. He didn't deserve what happened, Jonas whispered. The agent standing guard shifted uncomfortably. Hours passed until a new figure entered. Marla Crane. No press, no cameras, just cold authority. You should have stayed forgotten, she said softly. Jonas met her gaze with a calm that unnerved her. I saved him because it was right. That's something you wouldn't understand. She stepped closer. You think the president can protect you. You think the truth makes you safe. Jonas smiled sadly. Truth doesn't make you safe. It makes you free. The silence that followed felt like a countdown. Eli met Detective Vickers in a parking garage, shadows stretching across concrete pillars like bars of a cage. They're watching both of us, Vickers warned, sliding a file across the hood of his car. Inside were grainy photos. Soldiers, reports, signatures. The same mission Jonas had mentioned, but one page stood out, a classified clearance signed by Marla Crane herself. She was part of the cover-up, Eli muttered. Vickers nodded grimly. And now she's trying to erase what's left. Above them, tires screeched. Someone leaving in a hurry. Eli looked up just as a drone-like hum echoed through the garage. He's been found, Vickers said. The two men bolted for the exit as headlights burst from the darkness. They barely escaped. Hours later, Eli's car screeched to a halt outside an abandoned newspaper office. Inside, dust floated in amber light. Vickers slammed the door behind them, chest heaving. You need to go public, he said. You need to go public, he said. Eli stared at the yellowed headlines plastered on the wall. Stories of corruption. War forgotten heroes. If I go public, they'll kill him, Eli whispered. Vickers placed a shaking hand on his shoulder. Vickers placed a shaking hand on his shoulder. They'll kill him either way. Silence filled the room until the old clock struck midnight. Eli knew what he had to do. Gather proof, expose the network, and risk everything. Justice wasn't a case anymore. It was war. Meanwhile, at the White House, President Alan Pierce faced his advisors in a dim conference room. They're going to bury him again, one aide warned. The president's hands clenched. Not this time. His chief of staff spoke quietly. Sir, Marla Crane is linked to the operation. If this goes public, it could destroy everything. The president stood, eyes dark with resolve. Then, let it. Outside, lightning cracked over the Washington skyline, illuminating the American flag whipping in the storm. Somewhere in that vast city, Eli and Jonas were fighting the same invisible war. One for power, one for truth. And though they didn't know it, their paths were about to collide again in a way that would change everything. Morning broke over Dunewood like a quiet lie. Eli's phone buzzed again. A message with no sender. Pier 19. Midnight. Bring no one. He stared at it, knowing it was either a trap or the truth. Across town, Vickers scanned city, surveillance feeds tracing vehicles tied to Marla's office. She's moving something, he muttered. Eli packed his case files, heart pounding with grim resolve. Jonas' transfer location had gone dark. No official record, no digital trace. Someone had erased him again. Eli felt the weight of the choice ahead. Go silent and survive, or chase the truth into the dark. He chose the dark. Outside his window, the rain began again, thin and relentless, like the whisper of justice refusing to die. At the Justice Department, Marla Crane stormed through the corridors, heels echoing like gunfire. "Lock it down!" she barked. No leaks, no records. Her assistant hesitated. "Ma'am, the president's inquiry." "I'll handle the president," she snapped. Behind her, the glow of her office monitors displayed classified files, missions, code names, casualty lists. At the top, Operation Hollow Sun. She paused, staring at Jonas's name. For the first time, guilt flickered across her face. A memory of a young soldier dragging a wounded officer to safety under fire. But guilt was weakness, and Marla Crane had no room for weakness. She closed the file and whispered to herself. "It ends tonight." Eli met Vickers near the waterfront as the city dimmed under twilight. "You shouldn't go alone," Vickers warned. "You think I have a choice?" Eli replied, zipping his coat. The detective handed him a small flash drive. "Everything I could find. Mission logs, command orders, the connection between Marla and the operation." Eli pocketed it. "If I don't make it, get this to the president." Vickers gave a solemn nod, eyes heavy with understanding. The sound of distant waves filled the silence between them. Somewhere beyond the harbor, the truth waited like a storm ready to break. Eli turned toward the pier, every step echoing with purpose. Tonight would not be about survival. It would be about redemption. Midnight cloaked the docks in shadows. Eli approached Pier 19, footsteps echoing on wet planks. The air smelled of salt and rust. A single warehouse light flickered ahead. He pushed the door open and froze. Jonas Hale sat tied to a chair in the center of the empty room, bruised but alive. "They said you wouldn't come," Jonas whispered. "They were wrong." A voice echoed from the dark. Marla Crane. "You should have stayed a lawyer, Eli." She stepped into the light, pistol in hand. Eli raised his hand slowly. "This isn't about me." "No," she said coldly. "It's about what people like him make us do." Jonas looked up, eyes fierce despite his pain. "You can't bury what you already killed." The silence that followed felt electric, charged with years of buried sin. For a heartbeat, time held still. Then, a gunshot. The sound tore through the night, echoing off the steel walls. Marla stumbled back, clutching her arm. The pistol clattered to the ground. Vickers stepped from the shadows, gun still raised. "It's over, Marla." She glared through the pain. "You think this changes anything?" Eli rushed to Jonas, cutting the ropes. "We're done running," Eli said. Jonas nodded, weak but steady. Outside, sirens wailed closer. Marla slumped against a crate, her voice low. "You don't understand. It goes higher than all of us." Eli stared at her, rain leaking through holes in the roof above, dripping between them like the ticking of a clock. "Then we take it higher." The camera of fate pulled back. 3 lives bound by a secret, standing in the cold light of unfinished justice. The next morning, Dunewood awoke to silence before the storm. Newsfeeds spoke of an altercation at the pier, but no names, no faces. Eli drove north with Jonas in the back seat, his wounds bandaged, his spirit unbroken. The flash drive lay on the dashboard, the key to everything. The mission, the cover-up, the truth. "You sure about this?" Jonas asked quietly. "They'll come after you too." Eli nodded, eyes fixed on the endless highway ahead. "They already are." The skyline of Washington glimmered faintly on the horizon, a promise and a warning all at once. Justice wasn't just a courtroom anymore. It was a battlefield. By midday, Eli and Jonas met a contact at a rest stop diner on the outskirts of D.C. A young journalist named Tessa Nolan, eager but afraid. "You have proof," she whispered. Eli slid the flash drive across the table. "Everything they buried." She hesitated before plugging it into her laptop, scanning the files. Her eyes widened. If this is real, it ties half the defense counsel to illegal ops. Jonas leaned forward, voice low. It's real, and it cost lives. Tessa looked up, trembling slightly. If I publish this, they'll shut us down in hours. Eli's reply was calm but fierce. Then publish it in minutes. Outside, dark clouds rolled over the Capitol dome, as though history itself was holding its breath. That night, Eli and Jonas waited in a motel room, the television flickering with news they didn't trust. She'll release it, Eli said softly, though part of him feared she wouldn't get the chance. Jonas stared out the window, every car that passed stirring old instincts. They won't let the truth breathe, he murmured. Suddenly, headlights swept across the curtains, then stopped. Silence. Eli reached for the pistol Vickers had given him. Footsteps approached outside. The door rattled once, then twice. A voice called, "FBI! Open up!" Eli looked at Jonas. "Do you believe them?" Jonas shook his head. The lights went out. In that perfect darkness, the war for truth began again. Gunfire erupted through the door. Eli dove to the floor, dragging Jonas behind the bed. The walls splintered as bullets tore through cheap drywall. "We need to move!" Jonas shouted. They crashed through the bathroom window, landing hard in the alley behind the motel. Rain poured, washing blood and dust from their faces. Sirens wailed in the distance, real or staged. Neither could tell. They ran into the maze of back streets, breath visible in the cold night air. Somewhere above the noise, Eli's phone buzzed. A message from Tessa. It's Liv. He stopped, staring at the screen. The truth was out. For the first time, the world knew what they'd done. Justice had finally spoken, not from a courtroom, but from the chaos itself. By dawn, the nation trembled. Every major network aired the files, proof of covert missions, falsified deaths, and political cover-ups. Protests filled the streets. The president addressed the country, his voice steady. Justice begins with truth, no matter the cost. Marla Crane was arrested by federal agents, her eyes hollow as flashbulbs exploded around her. In a quiet park outside the Capitol, Eli and Jonas sat on a bench, silent. "We did it," Eli said softly. Jonas looked up at the rising sun, its light cutting through the haze. "No," he said. "We just reminded them what truth looks like." The city hummed with unrest and rebirth. For once, the system trembled not from power, but from conscience. The truth had spread faster than anyone could contain. For the first time in years, people spoke the same word with meaning: justice. But with truth came consequence. Eli found himself under investigation for leaking classified information. Journalists camped outside his door, demanding quotes and photos. Inside his apartment, he watched the world had shaken unravel on live TV. Politicians resigned, generals faced hearings, and families of lost soldiers wept in vindication. Still, Eli felt no triumph, only exhaustion. He had uncovered the rot, but the wounds it left were everywhere. Jonas called from a secure facility, his voice frail but firm. "Don't regret it," he said. "We did what had to be done." Eli looked out the window at the sirens fading into dawn. "I just hope it was worth the cost," he whispered. At the Capitol, President Pierce stood before Congress, his face lined with sleepless nights. "We cannot build peace on buried lies," he declared. "To those who came forward, know that history will remember your courage." Cameras flashed, applause erupted, but his eyes betrayed sorrow. Behind him, the flag hung, motionless, heavy with meaning. In the crowd sat families of fallen soldiers, holding photos and tears in equal measure. Justice had found its voice, but redemption would take time. Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance, as if reminding the nation that storms never truly end. They only pass. waiting for their next return. In her holding cell, Marla Crane sat staring at the small barred window, light slicing through in thin bands. Reporters called her a traitor, the nation's villain, but deep inside she wondered when the system had first broken. With her choices or the world that rewarded them, he believed in honor, she whispered, remembering Jonas on the battlefield, the moment she turned her back for a promotion. The silence of the cell pressed in, unrelenting. A guard passed by, indifferent. For the first time, Marla understood what true isolation felt like. Not confinement of walls, but of conscience. Jonas Hale's hospital room overlooked the capital, the same city that had erased him decades ago. Bandages covered his ribs, but his spirit burned steady. A nurse turned on the television. Footage of protests chanting his name. Jonas Hale, the forgotten soldier. He turned to the window, whispering, "Don't make me a symbol. Make me a lesson." The door opened, and Eli stepped in quietly. "They're calling you a hero," he said. Jonas smiled faintly. "Heroes die in silence. Men like you make noise." Eli pulled up a chair, sitting beside him in the soft hum of machines. For the first time, the weight between them lifted. The war had been fought, and truth had survived, battered, but breathing. Weeks later, Dunewood began to heal. Streets, once lined with anger, now echoed with hope. Eli walked past the courthouse where it all began. The same doors where laughter once followed the words, "He's a nobody." He paused, looking up at the building as sunlight broke through passing clouds. The world still carried its scars, but somewhere within them was renewal. His phone buzzed. A message from Jonas. "Freedom tastes strange, but it's real." Eli smiled faintly. For the first time, he felt peace, not because the fight was over, but because he'd learned what justice truly meant. It wasn't victory, it was persistence. And sometimes, persistence was enough to change the world. Months passed. The nation had changed, but not healed. The headlines shifted from scandal to recovery, from outrage to rebuilding. Eli Ward walked through a park in Dunewood, once a place of protests, now quiet beneath soft spring sunlight. He carried a small envelope, a letter from the president's office inviting him to a memorial service. Inside, it was a handwritten note. "Truth costs, but silence costs more. AP." Eli folded it gently, watching children chase each other across green grass where anger once burned. He thought of Jonas, recovering far away, of Marla, locked in silence, and of the hundreds whose stories would never be heard. Justice wasn't perfect, it was human, and that, he realized, was enough reason to keep fighting. In a quiet veterans' hospital upstate, Jonas Hale sat on a wooden bench overlooking a field of flags fluttering in the wind. His body had weakened, but his eyes still carried that quiet strength forged in fire and betrayal. Beside him, a nurse read from a newspaper, voice soft. "Public Defender Eli Ward receives National Integrity Medal." Jonas smiled faintly. "About time they recognized the living," he murmured. He leaned back, letting the wind move through his gray hair. And for the first time in years, his heart felt light. He had been forgotten by power, but remembered by truth, and that was immortality enough. Marla Crane stood before the parole board, her hands clasped, eyes sunken but lucid. "I believed justice meant winning," she said quietly. "I was wrong." The board members listened in silence. "I won't ask for mercy," she continued, "only that no one else makes the same mistake I did." Her words trembled with sincerity, a first for her. As guards escorted her back, a shaft of light broke through the small window above the chamber. She looked up and smiled faintly, not at freedom, but at something deeper, understanding. Justice had found her too, in the one place she could never escape, herself. Eli arrived at the memorial service held on the Capitol lawn, surrounded by rows of names carved into stone, soldiers, whistleblowers, and truth-seekers who had paid the ultimate price. The president spoke briefly, his words carried by the wind. Justice is not given. It is chosen again and again. Eli closed his eyes, hearing those words, not as politics, but as prayer. Around him, citizens placed white roses on the marble slabs. He bent to leave one himself, whispering, "For the ones who believed when no one listened." The sun broke through the clouds, turning the names on the memorial to gold. That evening, Eli returned to Dunewood, walking once more past the courthouse where everything began. The rain had returned, light, cleansing, unthreatening. He stood beneath the lamppost, watching the reflections ripple across the wet pavement. In his mind, he heard Jonas' voice. "Freedom tastes strange, but it's real." He smiled, whispering to the night, "It's real." The camera rose slowly, capturing the courthouse doors glowing warm under the rain, the word justice carved above them, eternal and silent. And as the rain fell, the city exhaled, not in despair but in renewal. Justice had been bruised, battered, and nearly lost, but never broken.